This is programming with conditionals. Conditionals in any programming language are really the core of real programming. The things we've been doing in the class up until now have been sort of getting your feet wet with manipulating variables and doing simple arithmetic, printing strings and things like that, but that's not really programming. You get into programming when you tell your program or your script how to make decisions based on various types of states that your program can be in. You have a variable that can be set to some number. If the number is greater than this, then do that. Otherwise, do something else, right? And that's what a conditional is. The conditionals are all based on the notion of having an if statement, if, which is the same in almost every programming language. It's the same in Python. A condition of some kind, which is an expression. It can be a variable, a comparison, an inequality, or equality, and I'll show you how to do a couple of different versions of that. And then optionally, you have the ability of doing something if the condition is true, and then something else if the condition is false. Python's formatting makes the if statement a little bit trickier because Python enforces indentation, and in Python the indentation and the format of your code actually has bearing on the syntax of your code. That's one of the things that makes Python a little unique, but hopefully I can show this to you visually and it will make sense and you'll be able to pick it up pretty quickly and see the gestalt of how Python requires you to arrange code. Okay, so for a conditional to make sense, you need to have something to be able to test. That's the key part of the conditional. So the easiest thing we can have is a variable. We can also use expressions, and of course you can use strings and any kind of data type, right? For now, let's just keep it as simple as possible, and I'm just going to say that this is some amount, and the amount will be 3. Okay, so now I want to say, if the amount is equal to 3, and then I use a colon. And here's the tricky part in Python is that I have to indent the part of the code block that's going to be executed if the condition is true. And I'll just do a print statement and I'll say congratulations. Again, all of my examples are beyond contrived, but hopefully you can at least sort of get the pattern here and figure out how this works. Now, one key thing to see here is that I'm using 2 equal signs here and 1 equal sign here. So what's the difference? Remember from the beginning of the course, we talked about the single equal sign as being the assignment operator. What the assignment operator means is I want to take this value of 3 and stick it into this variable called amount. The assignment operator assigns a value to a variable. So it takes that 3 and puts it into amount. The double equal sign does something totally different, and this can be a little bit of a pitfall for beginning programmers because you'll at some point forget to type the double equal sign when you really mean the single equal sign. Python will catch this, and a lot of modern programming languages will catch this. Unfortunately, older programming languages like C don't always catch this, and it can lead to unfortunate things. But I have a mnemonic that I use, a little mental trick that I use to remind myself of the difference between the single equal sign, the assignment operator, and the double equal sign, which is the equivalence or comparison operator. And I say to myself in my head whenever I'm typing this kind of comparison, I say is equal, and I tap the equal sign twice. I go tap tap, right? So every time I do a comparison in a conditional like this, in an if statement like this, and I'm saying amount is equal to 3, I say is equal as I type the equal sign twice. I don't know, it works for me. I almost never make that mistake because I say is equal when I type the 2 equal signs. I hope it works for you because it's a tricky one to get over when you're first learning how to program. Hopefully it won't be too much of a problem. Anyway, so we say again, if amount is equal to 3, and then a colon, then a line break, and this is the second part that's very tricky, and this is the part that's unique to Python. We need to do an indent here. You can either do it as a tab or you can use 4 spaces, which a lot of Python programmers use. I use an editor called TextMate, which I love and is totally worth the 75 or so bucks that it costs to buy. Huge productivity benefit for me. I think it's a terrific editor, and one of the nice things about TextMate is that it knows Python's proclivities. It knows what Python wants to see, and it understands that when you type an if and hit enter, you're going to want an indent, because the next line will only execute if the condition is true. Okay, so this is the simplest sort of example that you can possibly imagine using a conditional. There's additional nuances to this, but I'll get to those in a second. First, let's go ahead and run this and make sure that it works. I'll save the script, hop back over here to my terminal window, and I'm going to type in if, and it's congratulations. So the amount that I had assigned to my variable is actually equal to 3, the value that I was looking for here. Now what happens if it's not equal to, let's say it's 12 or something like that, right? Now we know that this code, the congratulations, is not going to execute because the condition is not true. Amount is not equal to 12, right? Let's run this again to verify that that's true. And nothing happens at all, right? There's no output. It did the comparison. It did all that stuff sort of internally, but we didn't tell it to do anything if the value was not 12, right? And we've got some other options that we can do here. Now I can actually say not 12, right? Exclamation point, equal sign is shorthand for not equal to 12, right? I save that, I go back to my terminal and I run it again, and it says congratulations, the amount that you compared here in the conditional test is not equal to 12. Okay, so that's another option using the inequality operator. The inequality operator is the exclamation point and the equal sign together. Okay, so what happens if I want the conditional to do one thing if the test is true and something else if the test is false, right? Let's say that 3 is the value that we really want, and that triggers the congratulations. And if the value is something other than 3, then we have a problem, right? So I'm going to go back to my original condition here, and I'm going to say if amount is equal to 3, then print congratulations. But if the amount is not equal to 3, then I say else, E-L-S-E, with a colon. And then the block of code that goes after the else is going to also have to be indented. And then I say print, sorry, that's wrong, right? Okay, so because the variable amount has to be equal either to 3 or to something else, this block of code will always print something. It will either print congratulations or it will print sorry, that's wrong. And let's verify that that's the case. I'll go back and run it again. It says congratulations. Now if I change the amount, go back to run it again, it tells me sorry. Okay, so again, another one of my famous mega contrived examples, but it is the essence of what you will have to do with an if statement. A couple of other things that are not in the text. You can have as many lines of code as you want, and I'll show you an example of this. Very sorry. And of course it doesn't have to be just prints, you know, you can do other stuff as well too, but I'll go back and run this again, and you can see that I've executed multiple lines of code in the block, as long as they're all indented. That's the key thing. You can see that all of the lines of code that come after the initial if are indented. That's how Python knows that all of these lines of code go together as a block, right? This is a code block, and this is the code block that executes if the condition is true. This code block is the code block that executes if the condition is false, right? Now, what if we have more than 2 possibilities, right? Let's say that we wanted to print one thing if the amount is 3, one thing if the amount is 5, and then something else if the amount is something other than those 2 values. In that case, we can use elif. This lets you have 3 or more conditions. Well, I suppose that's okay, right? And so you can chain these together forever if you want, right? If this, else if that, else something else. That's kind of how you should think about it, right? So this construct will handle three different situations, right? One if amount is 3, the other if amount is 5, and finally if the amount is anything other than one of the cases we've already handled. 3, 5, anything else, right? Let's make this 5 just to test. Save it and I'll run it again. Well, I suppose that's okay. Suppose. I gotta fix my typo there, but anyway, you get the idea, right? And you can do this forever. If amount is equal to 7, oops, is equal to 7, right? Right, and then I'll change this, change it to 7, right? And run it again. Okay, so in this case, I've handled a whole bunch of different cases using a block or a sort of chain together series of blocks of code. I've used if, else, and elif or else if, and that's how Python does it. Now, one thing if you're an experienced programmer coming from a different language other than Python is that some languages have case logic statements where you can say, based on this condition, do this if the case is that, do this other thing if the case is that. Python does not have a sort of separate case logic. They decided, the designers of the language decided not to have that, and the reason is because the case logic is what I just showed you, chaining together if and elif and else. That's how you do it in Python. There is no separate case logic construct in Python. So if you're coming from another language that has a switch case statement or a case statement of some kind, you're not going to find that in Python. This is it. What I just showed you is how you do that in Python. This is the official way to do it. Now, let's try one more example of this with inequalities that you might find useful. And I'm going to get rid of all the elifs here. Let's say that I want to print out something if the amount is greater than 3. So this is an inequality operator here. I'm no longer using straight equivalence. So that means that if amount is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or if amount is 3.1, if it's a float, then it will print what's in this block. Otherwise, it's going to print the other thing. So let's test this one out again. Okay, so it is greater than 3, which is what we expected, and we got the wow, that's a lot. Okay, beautiful. Now what happens if it's 3? Which one do you think is going to be printed? Will it be wow, that's a lot, or will it be sorry? Well, 3 is not greater than 3. So we're going to get the wow, very sorry. But what if we did want that, right? What if we wanted it to be greater than or equal to 3? And then we will have the success message here. We have a greater than or equal to operator in Python, which is the same as the greater than or equal to operator in almost every other programming language. Greater than or equal to. And now it will say, wow, that's a lot. The condition is true because the value of the variable amount is greater than or equal to 3. In this case, it is equal to, right? In general, it's a good idea to use greater than or equal to wherever you can. I feel like it's a good programming practice because it prevents missing certain cases where the value is exactly equal to. To me, it's just a little bit clearer. So usually when I do an inequality in a conditional like this, I almost always use either greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, and that's how it is. Now, you can use strings as well too, and I'll show you how this works. You could probably figure it out, but I want to do it just for completeness. And you can't use inequalities with strings, but you can use equalities, right? And in this case, I'm saying if the variable amount is equal to the string huge, then print the success message, otherwise print the failure message. Go back, say print. That's pretty good. And then I'll change this just so you can see the false case there. Okay, so using strings with conditionals is very similar to using numbers, and of course floats and the other data types can be used. Any kind of valid expression can be used in a conditional as long as the expression can evaluate to either true or false, because that's what if needs to see, either true or false.